If we get reelected, you don't have to pay taxes on the first $15,000 you earn, and that's going to help the most vulnerable people in our country the most. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you doing this. My name is Maryam Monsef. I am the Liberal running for re-election in Peterborough Kawartha to be your Member of Parliament. I'm grateful to have had that opportunity for the last 4 years. It's given me a chance to give back some of the kindness that I've received from this community. We've been able to make a lot of good things happen for this community, but there's a bit more work to be done, and that's the work ahead. This place is my home. I used to be a Peterborough This Week carrier. It was my first job when we first came to Canada. And from then on, I had opportunities to work in various capacities, whether it was at the Immigration Settlement Agency, at the Community Foundation, at Trent, at Fleming, running my own business. I also had opportunities to volunteer. And in those volunteer opportunities, like at the YWCA, I learned that I could make a difference, but I also learned that if we have a federal government that is putting a cap on the level of advocacy women's organizations can do, for example. If we have a federal government that doesn't see reconciliation as a priority, if we have a federal government that doesn't believe in the science of climate change, then Canada as a whole and this community won't be everything it'll be. I'm running for re-election because there's more work to be done, and because I'm afraid of what's going to happen to Canada and to our community if our Conservative colleagues have an opportunity to govern again. We're going to see more Conservative cuts at the federal level, just as we've seen at the provincial level, and those Conservative cuts hurt people, and they also hurt our future.
Okay. So first of all, welcome back to Peterborough This Week. I didn't know that you were a carrier back in the day.
I was. I barely spoke any English, but I was.
So what have you been up to the past 4 years? What's been keeping you busy?
Well, you sent me to Ottawa to be your voice, to be your champion, and to advocate on your behalf, and that's kept me pretty busy. But it's the good kind of busy, the kind of busy that leads to over $200 million in federal investments coming to this community. The kind of busy that leads to a $600 million investment in the Trent Severn Waterway. I've had opportunities also to make sure that I'm staying connected to the community. One of the reasons I ran was because I saw that other decision makers weren't always open to hearing other people's points of view, especially when those points of view were so different from theirs. And so those conversations have led to a national housing strategy that has Peterborough all over it. We've been able to house 1,400 families here locally. We've cut unemployment rate with our investments and with the good work of the people of this community by nearly half. We actually have a plan to fight climate change while growing the economy. And in considering the volunteer work that I've been doing in this community, in my capacity as a minister around the cabinet table, I've been involved in advancing rights for women as well as reconciliation with Indigenous people.
Okay. So there's a number of topics that you brought up that I think we're going to be talking about in the next little while. And one of those topics, let's just go ahead and start with climate change, because I think that's kind of at the top of people's minds right now with these international climate rallies. So what is the plan going forward into the next 4 years for a Liberal government to deal with the climate crisis? Because we're kind of at a critical juncture here.
We absolutely are, and we are actually in a transition as we speak. We have committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. This is a bold commitment, and it drives inspiration from science, which is telling us that we're running out of time, and draws inspiration from the people of our communities, right? This community in particular has been at the forefront of advocating for climate action for decades. The Linda Slavens and the Al Slavens of this community have been sounding the alarm for years, and now to see young people and community members from across generations fill the streets and create political space and give politicians a new mandate to do more, that's inspiring. We started out with a 50-point plan worth $70 billion to fight climate change. We reversed what the previous government had done. Scientists are no longer muzzled. In fact, they've received the single largest investment in history. That's important for all the ways that institutions like Trent and Fleming can be part of those solutions. We've invested in clean tech and, organizations and businesses like Noble Gen, like Green Up, like Random Acts of Green. They have received investments from our government because we believe Peterborough is a hub for those solutions. And in coming up with those solutions, we can employ people right here in this community.
So the goal is net zero emissions by 2050. Is that fast enough? Can we work even faster to get to that point? Because we pretty much have, according to this UN report, a decade before we get to an irreversible. Well, all climate change is irreversible, but we get to that point where we really can't do anything about it at that point.
It is an ambitious goal. It's an ambitious goal. We will be exceeding with the plan that we've proposed to Canadians for the next 4 years. We will be exceeding our Paris climate goals for 2030. And look, I am a big believer in what happens when a group of determined individuals and institutions, along with governments and the private sector, come together to solve a problem. We can exceed our own expectations when we work together. Net zero by 2050 is quite ambitious already, but looking at the spirit and the passion that young people and other climate advocates have, Canada is very well positioned to lead globally the solutions to getting us there.
So another one of the criticisms of climate action that I hear from people who are hesitant to see government step in and invest more in that issue is that, well, Canada is not one of the primary polluters in the world. What is your response to that? Do we have a role regardless, or should we back off because we're not one of those primary polluters?
So climate change does not know borders, and Canada has an obligation to step up and do its part. Canadians obviously care about climate change and expect their governments to be part of the solution. We also have immense opportunities, economic opportunities in made in Canada approaches that can help the rest of the world. I will also say this, for 10 years under Mr. Harper, Canada basically stuck its head in the sand and pretended like the rest of the world's issues did not affect us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The world is becoming smaller. We are connected more than we've ever been. Something that happens in Barbados, a hurricane that hits any corner of the world, has an impact right here in our community. And we hope as Canadians that if, God forbid, there ever came a day when we were in trouble, that our neighbors around the world would step up and help us.
Okay. So moving on to another topic, you mentioned ambitious goals, and one ambitious goal that you've stated is to build 2,000 affordable units in Peterborough over the course of 2 years. And that's to deal with the housing crisis that we're currently seeing in the community. So what are the details of that plan, and how do you go about doing it? Because 2 years, it takes a considerable amount of time and investment in housing to build that stock up. So how do you plan on doing that over just the course of a couple of years?
Well, first of all, I believe in this community, and I've seen what we can achieve when we come together, when we work on a plan that makes sense, and when we go for it, we make great things happen. Look at what we did when we came together and built Trent University. We built Fleming College. We have the capacity to do big things and do them very, very well. What we have going for us in terms of addressing the housing affordability challenges in this community are a few really great things. Firstly, the city and the county of Peterborough have a plan, a 10-year plan to address homelessness and housing shortage. That's really important because they're collecting data, and the federal government at the same time, for the first time ever, has a housing strategy. It too is a 10-year plan, and by the way, that's no accident. Peterborough's been working to shape the national housing strategy, and so we've been able to coordinate the local plan with the national plan. That federal strategy that we came up with puts the federal government back in the business of affordable housing. It has $55 billion in funding for communities like ours to apply to. And when we work together, and as you can see, those stars have aligned, when we're reminded of the challenge that can be that is not having a safe and affordable roof over your head, that urgency is there as well. I believe we can all row in the same direction and get those housing units built right here in this community, and in the process save and transform lives. There will always be reasons for why something can't happen. There will always be obstacles along the way. But that's why we step up to these challenging roles, because we know that those obstacles can be overcome when we work together. I certainly do. I've seen it with my own eyes. And I have no doubt that between the work that City Council is doing, between the work that's happening at the county level, hopefully this community will give us another mandate. We'll be able to do that work.
So one of the things that I've heard from housing advocates in this community is that it's not necessarily the initial funding to build affordable housing that's the problem. It's the operational funding, the funding that it takes to keep things going and maintain these units over time. So how does the National Housing Strategy fit into that? Is it primarily oriented around helping build it or maintain it? And how far ahead into the future does that look? Is it just 5, 10, 15 years, or is it just a year? Where's the National Housing Strategy help out?
That's a really good question. The National Housing Strategy commits to building brand new units. It also commits to refurbishing existing units. There is also, as of April 2020, a new housing benefit is going to kick in. And this housing benefit provides a certain subsidy to an individual so that they, no matter where they choose to live, take that subsidy with them. The idea here is to provide them with greater mobility so that just like the rest of Canadians and as per the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they're able to go wherever they need to. We also know that the provinces play a really important role in providing some of those supports, and we signed a bilateral agreement with the previous provincial government, and we know that this government too and our MPP too see firsthand the housing crisis, and we look forward to working with them in partnership to address this. In addition to the housing strategy, our overall economic plan includes a Canada Child Benefit so that families have more money in their pockets. We've increased supports for seniors in Canada, including those in our community, so that they have more more dollars to make ends meet. There's also something to be said about the pharmacare plan that we're introducing, the childcare provisions that we are introducing, the 25% cut in cell phone bills, and if we get reelected, you don't have to pay taxes on the first $15,000 you earn, and that's going to help the most vulnerable people in our country the most. All those measures add up, and the end result is life is more affordable for Canadians, and that housing strategy means that a safe roof over your head becomes the anchor for you as you build your life up and pursue your dreams.
So how far ahead does that National Housing Strategy?
10-year plan.
10-year plan? Okay.
It's a 10-year plan, and what it also has is legislation that has made housing a right. And so that means that future governments are accountable to Parliament and to Canadians on reporting on how we're making progress in cutting homelessness by 50%, for example, over the next 5 years, and ultimately eliminating it. Future governments will be accountable to ensure that those housing investments are maintained and improved over time.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the maintenance of those funds, because it's great that that money is being put in there, and that the government is pledging to keep that funding if reelected. But that's the case of, we've heard, and one of your opponents, Candace Shaw, had said that in the 1980s the federal government got out of affordable housing. So how do we make it so that the government doesn't get back out of affordable housing?
Well, future governments can choose to undo the progress that we've made together. And it's up to Canadians. It's up to Canadians with their votes, but also with their advocacy in between elections, to make sure that every government is held to account, that every government sees issues like housing as priority and does not for a second think that they can get out of it without there being a high political price to pay. One of the things that keeps me up at night, and we only have 19 more days to go with this election, but one of the things that keeps me up at night is what happens, everything that's at stake this election, right? The choice is between moving forward on continuing to invest in housing and continuing to build units of housing right here in this community, or potentially not. The choice is between continuing to make progress on addressing climate change and growing our economy, or not. The choice is between continuing to lift, we've lifted 900,000 Canadians out of poverty, continuing with that, or going back to an era where tax cuts and benefits benefited the most wealthy in this country. That's what's at stake this election, and that's why it's such an important election.
All right. So let's take a short break, and then we'll get back to it and talk about a couple of more issues.
I'll drink more water out of my Star Wars mug.
All right. So we'll be right back then. So we're back, and let's continue talking about other important issues that are affecting our community. Let's talk about the opioid crisis here, because it is something where we're seeing record numbers of deaths in our community, and the numbers are alarming. So what is the federal strategy for dealing with this opioid crisis?
First of all, the need to address problematic substance use with compassion, and second, to base solutions and interventions on evidence. One of the things that I learned at Trent University, where I started a mental health advocacy group, it's called Active Minds. It's still going. One of the things I learned then was the importance of compassion, but also the important role that stigma plays in preventing people who are suffering in silence from seeking the supports they need. That compassion piece is really important. And what we've seen in the past, approaches that haven't worked are approaches that tend to criminalize victims as opposed to treat them with dignity and with compassion. The evidence points to certain interventions that work really well. Interventions like safe consumption sites. They work. Housing is part of that solution. We believe in those safe consumption sites, and I get worried when I hear Mr. Scheer say that those safe consumption sites are a terrible idea. And that's him directly speaking. That's a direct quote. Safe consumption sites save lives, and if they close, people will die. And I also think that preventative measures like ensuring safe housing, affordable housing are really important. The National Housing Strategy, in fact, has a carve-out specifically to house individuals with mental health challenges and with problematic substance use. The other piece is, for the first time in our history, when a health accord was negotiated between the federal government and provinces, there was mental health funding, billions of dollars set aside. that's a really big deal because we have to be able to look after our mental health and provide support to those who need it most. And if we elect it, one of our commitments is to ensure, first of all, that every Canadian, regardless of where they live, have access to a family doctor or a health team to support them. And second, to ensure that there is a standard for mental health supports across the country. I say all this, and maybe I'll end up with this. In our community, there are a lot of talented people who have chosen to devote their life to supporting those with problematic substance use, to advocate for them, and to help save and transform their lives. And I'm going to take this opportunity to thank them. Our strategy as a federal government is only as effective and as relevant as the conversations we have with them and the supports that we provide them. So there's $100 million in investment to do just that.
So if consumption sites work, why haven't we seen one in our community yet?
There is an application process, and should there be a consensus among those who would be doing the work in this community, I would back it every step of the way. Make sure that we are able to get our fair share of federal dollars for it in Ottawa. And of course, there's a process to go through here locally to make sure that those conversations are had with neighbors and with stakeholders. Before we formed government, Mr. Harper's government did not see safe consumption sites as a solution. There was only one under their watch. When we formed government, we quickly started to look for applications and approve them. So there's well over 30 now. And should this community see the merit in having one here, let's do it.
Okay. So how much is that in the hands of a federal government as well as in the hands of the provincial government? Because the provincial government, their portfolio is healthcare.
Absolutely.
So how much does the federal government have to work with the provincial government to make that happen? And are you guys on the same page?
Look, as the warden says, we're all in this together. Our constituents, we represent the same people. They expect us to work together. As I understand it, our MPP has personally committed to doing everything he can to provide solutions to address this challenge here. I support that, and whatever this community, and this community has the wisdom and the talent, whatever the community of experts here say we need, I'll be there. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a political issue. People's lives are at stake, and we all play a role in finding that solution.
Okay. Let's move on to the last topic of the day. I want to talk about the current state of politics right now. Over the past couple of years, and I'm looking back 4 or 5 years, and I don't know if it's because of the way that American politics has evolved or just kind of the international state of politics overall, but we've really seen the political sphere become kind of messier and more personal. I mean, how do we go about, what are your thoughts on the current state of politics as is right now, and what are your plans to rise above that situation, if any?
All those pieces that you shared, social media, they play a part in shaping our perception and our conversations about democracy and politics. I will say this, Canadian democracy is healthy, and it has never been stronger. We went out of our way during our mandate to ensure that those barriers that were preventing Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, homeless individuals in our communities, newcomers, young people from participating in the democratic process, that we removed them. We got rid of the Unfair Elections Act, which was making it harder for far too many people to be part of the process. And we also opened rights to voting to expats, Canadians who live abroad, because a Canadian is a Canadian. So democracy in Canada is strong, but it's always fragile. It is a gift. And I can tell you, not living in a democratic country comes with a lot of challenges. And so this precious gift, we have to take care of it. And the best way that I have learned to rise above is by just looking at my community. We as individuals shape the democratic conversations we have. We as individuals determine what content online we call out as fake news. We as individuals decide whether or not we call out colleagues or friends or loved ones for unhelpful or harmful remarks that are made that could help chip away at that precious gift of democracy. I draw inspiration from this community, as I said earlier, and everything I've learned about democracy, I've learned it here in Peterborough. This community wants to be part of the solution. This community wants to be engaged. Peterborough matters, and the Prime Minister even alluded to that when he was here in Peterborough last week, because he knows that this community takes democracy very seriously. So the way I try to go about it is stay focused on the task at hand, right? Politics is hard, absolutely. Don't for a moment mistake what I'm saying as, oh, it's fine. Politics is hard, and it's especially hard for women. It's especially hard for young people. It's especially hard for people of color and people who haven't been in those positions of power and influence. But the reward is getting things done, and I stay focused on that.
And I notice, just mentioning social media, that you see personal attacks on politicians. There's no shortage of them, and you're right. Women and people of color tend to be targeted more than others, than their other peers,
as well as LGBTQ2 individuals.
Yes, and I mean, there's certainly no shortage of people making personal attacks on you as well. And so I'm wondering, you see politicians handling it in different ways. Some politicians respond to it and kind of bear the brunt of it, but some politicians tend to ignore it. So what is your strategy when it comes to dealing with this kind of unconstructive feedback?
So that was something that happens to me a lot is people come up to me in the streets and they've got tears in their eyes. And they say, my God, I can't believe what, the trolls are saying online about you. I can't go on your social media feed because I have to quickly turn off my computer. I'm so sorry this happens to you. And what I remind them of is that may be 2 to 3% of the kinds of conversation I have. But the majority of the conversation I have are with thoughtful, concerned individuals in our community who are lovely. So first of all, do not despair. The world is not as dark and as awful as it is sometimes depicted on social media. Second, the piece around the vitriol online that personally bugs me is when my 9-year-old niece Googles me and sees horrible things said about me online. Or when anybody's 9 or 10-year-old niece or nephew Googles somebody in politics and sees the awful things that happen. And why that bugs me is because when young people see the way politicians or anybody's treated online, they think to themselves, why would I go and put myself through all of that just so I can make a difference? So it dissuades people from being part of the democratic process. That bugs me a lot. I also know that there are a lot of young people who experience that kind of cyberbullying and cyber violence, and it leads to really harmful consequences like mental illness and in some cases suicide. So in my capacity as the Minister for Women, I was able to work with my colleagues in other countries who also see it as a problem, who also believe cyber violence and gender-based violence is taking a whole new toll on people through the ways it's happening online. And we're moving forward on solutions. And I look forward to coming back and working with my government to ensure that we hold social media platforms accountable for what is posted and allowed to stay online. One of the things we've committed to is hateful content needs to be removed within 24 hours. We would expect that from digital giants, but there's more work to be done. And, the thing about life if something horrible happens to you, you can do a couple of things. You can choose to despair and give up, or you can channel that hurt and that anger into solving that problem. And I'm interested in living my life that way.
All right. So we're just about out of time, so I'll just leave it off with you. Is there anything else that you would like to add, or any messages that you'd like to get out there?
Look, this is a really important election. And in 19 days, our community is going to go to the polls and put an X next to somebody's name. I really hope that people would consider putting an X next to my name so that we can keep moving forward on making things better for people in our community and making our community and our country even stronger.
All right. Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.